Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. You know how sometimes it feels like things used to be better? Like the world was a brighter, more fun place.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. I get that.
Well, today we're going to explore that feeling. We're diving into chapter 5 of this book. It's all about how our perception of the world can change over time and how negativity can really affect how we experience life.
Sounds intriguing.
It is.
Huh?
So we're going to tackle some big questions like why does it feel like things were better in the past, even if objectively maybe they weren't? And what makes us slip into those kind of downward spirals where life just seems to lose its shine?
And the big question, how do we get back to that good feeling?
Yeah, exactly. Is there a way to shift back to a more positive, fulfilling way of living? To help us unpack all of this, I've got an expert here with me today.
Happy to be here. I found this chapter really thought-provoking. It makes you question how we might actually be creating those less than ideal realities for ourselves without even realizing it.
Okay, so let's start with the basics. Can you give us like a quick rundown of the main idea in the chapter, the key takeaway we should keep in mind?
Sure. The chapter basically says that how we experience the world is shaped more by our perception than by actual reality. And over time, we can develop what the author calls negative lifelines, where we start seeing everything through a negative lens.
So it's not that the world's actually getting worse, it's just our experience of it becomes more negative.
Exactly. It's like that classic example they use in the book. You know how some older folks say Coca-Cola tasted better when they were kids?
Oh, yeah, I've heard that one.
The formula hasn't changed, but their perception of it has shifted over time.
Right. It's not the Coke, it's them.
Interesting. And the chapter says this isn't just a personal thing. It can happen on like a bigger societal level, too.
That's right. The author introduces this idea of pendulums. They're like these systems or forces that feed off negative energy.
Okay, pendulums. Now that sounds a little out there. Think of it like those giant swinging pendulums you see in science museums. They have this momentum, and once they get going, it's hard to stop them. These negative pendulums in our lives are similar. They gain momentum by feeding on our fear, our anger, our worries, all those reactions we have to negative events.
So we're not just watching these negative things happen, we're actually like participating in them through our reactions. And that somehow makes the pendulum stronger.
Exactly. The chapter makes this really important point. It's this participation, this feeding of the pendulums that leads to what the author calls an induced transition.
An induced transition. What's that mean?
Basically, it means we're letting those pendulums push us onto those less desirable lifelines. Like we're giving them permission to shape our reality.
So we're not just victims of circumstance. We're actively contributing to our own negativity. Huh. That's kind of unsettling, but also interesting. It means we might have more control than we think.
That's the point the chapter's trying to make. But before we get into how we can take back that control, let's look at some real-world examples of how these induced transitions can actually happen. Things that people listening can relate to.
All right, good idea. Where should we start?
Well, let's talk about unemployment. It's something that causes a lot of anxiety, especially these days.
Yeah, for sure. I think most people have felt that worry at some point, even if they haven't actually lost their job.
Right. So imagine you hear about the economy slowing down. Maybe you see news reports about layoffs or someone, loses their job. That's like a little poke from the pendulum, planting that seed of fear.
And since we tend to react strongly to negative stuff, that little seed can grow into full-blown anxiety. We start picturing ourselves in that situation, worrying about bills, feeling insecure about our own jobs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that anxiety can start to affect how we work. We might become less focused, less productive, even start withdrawing from colleagues.
Like we're giving off this vibe of just waiting to be fired, even if we don't mean to.
And here's the thing. The chapter says that this fear, this anxiety, can actually make it more likely that we will lose our job. Like we're manifesting our own unemployment through all that negative energy.
So it's not just the economy. It's our internal state, too.
Precisely. That's what makes this idea of induced transition so fascinating. It's not just about things happening to us. It's about how we react to them and how those reactions can actually shape our reality.
Okay, that's unemployment. What about another example that might hit close to home for people? Let's talk about poverty. How do these pendulums fit in there?
Well, the chapter says that negative attitudes and envy can actually keep someone trapped in a cycle of lack. It's not just external circumstances, it's about our internal state.
So if you're always focused on what you don't have, comparing yourself to others who have more property, you're actually feeding this pendulum of poverty.
Exactly. It's like you get stuck in this negative feedback loop.
Makes sense. If you're surrounded by negativity, it's harder to see any chance of abundance.
Right. And that's why it's so important to understand these pendulums and how they work. Once we see how they operate, we can start to break free.
Okay, so we've seen how these pendulums can work in individual lives, but the chapter also talks about how they can influence like group experiences too, right?
Absolutely. Think about a fire in a crowded building. The panic itself can be more dangerous than the fire.
Wow, yeah, that's powerful. People making bad decisions getting trampled.
Mm.
It's like the collective fear is feeding the pendulum and making the chaos worse.
Exactly. It's like a runaway train of negativity. And we see this in all sorts of situations, from mass hysteria during epidemics to the escalation of conflicts and wars.
So we've seen how these pendulums work on a personal level and in groups.
Mm.
They feed off our negative reactions and create these induced transitions to less desirable lifelines. Starting to feel a bit bleak, to be honest. Is there any hope here? Can we escape the pull of these negative lifelines and get back to feeling the joy we felt before?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And the chapter does offer some hope. It introduces this concept of transurfing. It's a model that says we can learn to control our reactions and intentionally shift more positive lifelines. But the first step is awareness. We need to be aware of those initial pokes from the pendulums and choose not to engage.
So instead of getting caught up in all the fear and negativity, we can just step back and watch it without getting hooked. But how do we actually do that?
Well, that's where we start diving into the specific techniques of transurfing, and that's going to take us deeper into the chapter. But the main thing to remember here is that we have more power than we realize. We're not just victims of circumstance. We have the ability to shape our reality through our thoughts, beliefs, and actions.
That's definitely something to think about. We have a lot more to unpack here, so let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll dive into some of those techniques for taking back our power and shifting to more positive lifelines.
It's recognizing that we have a choice in how we react to what's happening around us.
Okay, so being aware is important, but what can we actually do to break free from these negative spirals?
The chapter digs into this concept of intention. Like, it's not enough to just want things to be different. You have to actually choose the reality you want.
So it's not just positive thinking. It's taking action that aligns with what we want.
Exactly. And that might mean things like setting clear goals, visualizing the life we want, being around positive people, and being thankful for what we already have.
So it's about changing our energy, focusing on what we want to create instead of what we're trying to avoid.
Right. It's like changing the station on our internal radio, tuning into a frequency that's more about joy and abundance and feeling fulfilled.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
It really shows how we can actively choose what we let into our minds.
And the more we do this, the better we get at creating a reality that matches what we truly desire.
Okay, let's go back to that unemployment example.
Yeah.
How could we use this idea of intention in that situation? Instead of getting stuck in the fear, what can someone do to shift their energy?
Instead of worrying about losing your job, you could focus on what you want in your career.
So maybe start looking at new opportunities, networking with people, taking some courses to learn new skills, things that make you feel more in control.
Yeah, exactly. By taking action, you're not just increasing your chances of finding a new job, you're also shifting your energy from fear to possibility. And the chapter says that's a huge difference.
Because when you're feeling that possibility, you're more likely to attract things that match what you want.
Absolutely. It's like you're sending a signal out to the universe saying, I'm open and ready for something new.
What about poverty then? How can we use intention to get out of that cycle of not having enough?
It starts by changing your mindset from scarcity to abundance.
So instead of thinking about what you don't have, you focus on appreciating what you do have.
Exactly. Cultivate that feeling of gratitude for the good things, even the small ones. And from that place of gratitude, you can start to picture a more abundant future for yourself.
So you might imagine living in a comfortable home, having financial security, being able to follow your passions. Really feel those emotions as if it's already happening.
Right. And the key is to actually feel those emotions, embody the feeling of having what you want. Because emotions are energy, and energy attracts like energy.
So it's not just thinking positive thoughts, it's about feeling them in your body, believing they're real.
Exactly. That's where the real change happens.
Okay, we've talked about unemployment, poverty, panic. What about epidemics? That feels really relevant these days. How does this induced transition idea apply to getting sick?
That's an interesting one. The chapter suggests that being afraid of getting sick can actually make us more likely to get sick.
So if we're always worried about getting sick, reading about every new virus, imagining ourselves being sick, we're actually increasing our chances of getting sick. But what about germs and viruses? Those are real too, right?
Of course. The chapter isn't denying the reality of germs and viruses, but it's saying that our mental and emotional state can affect our immune system. If we're stressed out, anxious, and afraid, our immune system gets weaker and we're more vulnerable.
So it's not about ignoring science. It's about understanding that how we feel inside can impact our physical health.
Hmm.
And the chapter seems to be saying that our internal state might even be the deciding factor sometimes.
Right. And on the flip side, if we're feeling positive, optimistic, and strong, our immune system gets stronger. So in the middle of an epidemic, how can we use this idea of intention to stay healthy?
Okay, so instead of freaking out, what can someone do to shift their energy towards being healthy?
Don't get caught up in the fear. Focus on feeling healthy and strong and full of life. Visualize yourself as healthy. Do things that boost your immune system and be around positive people.
It's about choosing to tune into that frequency of health and well-being.
Exactly. Because what we focus on grows. So if we're always thinking about sickness, that's what we're more likely to experience. But if we focus on health, that's what we'll attract.
It's like we're playing a part in creating our own reality. But what about when it feels like we have less control? Like the chapter also talks about war, which feels like a whole other level of negativity.
That's a great point. War is a complex issue, but the chapter applies the same principles. It suggests that war, like all those other pendulums, thrives on negative energy, and that energy can come from both sides of the conflict.
So it's not just the aggressors, it's the collective fear and anger and hatred that fuel the whole thing. But wouldn't that mean that even people who are working for peace could be adding to the problem by focusing on it so much?
That's a really interesting question, and the chapter talks about that. It argues that even people who are totally against war can accidentally contribute to its energy by focusing on it, resisting it, and giving it attention.
So even peaceful protests and anti-war movements could be feeding the pendulum. That's a tough one. So if we're not supposed to focus on the problem, what are we supposed to do? Just ignore it?
It's not about being passive or ignoring injustice. It's about finding ways to use our energy that don't fuel the violence. Maybe that means supporting groups working for peace, talking to people about it in a constructive way, or practicing forgiveness instead of holding on to anger.
It's about breaking the cycle of negativity, shifting from fear to hope, and believing that a peaceful world is possible.
Exactly. And I think we can apply that to all kinds of situations, not just war. It's about realizing that our energy is powerful and we can choose to use it to create more of what we want to see in the world.
Okay, so we've covered how these pendulums can work in our individual lives, in groups, and even globally.
Yeah.
And we've talked about how intention can help us get out of negative spirals and move towards more positive experiences. But before we wrap up, there's one example from the chapter we haven't talked about yet. It's something I think a lot of people listening can relate to: feeling stuck in a rut.
Ah, yes, that feeling of being trapped on a path that's lost its spark. It's common, and I think the chapter's perspective on this is really freeing.
So why do we sometimes feel like we're just going through the motions, like life has become boring and predictable?
The chapter suggests it happens when we get too comfortable, when we stop challenging ourselves and growing. We settle into a routine that feels safe and familiar, but it's not fulfilling anymore.
And the longer we stay in that comfort zone, the more our energy gets stuck, and we attract experiences that reflect that.
Exactly. It's a negative cycle that we create. And the way to break free is to bring some new energy into our lives. Maybe try new things, set new goals, do things that push us outside our comfort zone, or reconnect with things we used to be passionate about.
It's about shaking things up, breaking the routine, and getting that spark back. Because when we're excited and engaged, our energy vibrates at a higher level.
And when we're vibrating at that higher level, we attract experiences that match that. It's like sending a signal to the universe that we're ready for something new, something more, something better.
And the universe responds by giving us opportunities that align with what we want.
It's the law of attraction in action.
So whether we're feeling stuck in a job, a relationship, or just a boring routine, the key is to take action, to bring in some fresh energy, and to trust that the universe will meet us halfway.
That's the beauty of transurfing. It allows us to become conscious creators of our own reality.
It's realizing that we're not just passengers on this journey, we're the drivers.
And we get to choose where we're going, which brings us back to that idea of intention. We have the power to choose the direction we want to go in and to take steps that get us there.
This has been such an insightful look at how our thoughts, beliefs, and actions can shape our reality. It's really made me think about how I might be unintentionally creating my own negativity and how I can use these techniques to shift to a more positive experience of life. It really feels like this chapter wants us to be more involved in shaping our own reality instead of just accepting whatever happens to us.
Definitely. And that leads us to a crucial point. Being aware, we have to recognize those times when those negative pendulums are trying to hook us. Those little prods that can start us down a negative spiral.
So if we can catch ourselves in those moments before we get swept up in all that negativity, we have a chance to make a different choice.
Exactly. It's about knowing that we always have a choice in how we react. We can choose to feed the pendulum with our worries and fears, or we can choose to take a step back, observe and react in a way that matches the reality we want.
But that sounds a lot easier than it is. How do we actually train ourselves to be more aware of those little prods and make those conscious choices? I know the chapter gives us some practical ways to do this right.
It does. And one of the most powerful tools is visualization. It encourages us to actively picture ourselves experiencing the reality we want, feeling the emotions, as if it was already happening.
So if somebody's dealing with unemployment, instead of focusing on their fears, they could visualize themselves going to job interviews, feeling confident, getting a great new job, and feeling that sense of achievement.
Exactly. And the chapter really emphasizes using all your senses when you visualize. It's not just seeing it in your mind. It's about feeling those positive emotions in your body, hearing the sounds of success, even smelling and tasting the sweetness of achieving your goals.
So it's about creating a whole body experience of the reality you want to bring into being.
Right. And by doing this regularly, the chapter says we start to change our energy to match the frequency of our desired reality, making it more likely to actually happen.
So visualization is one tool. Are there others that the chapter recommends for getting free from those negative pendulums and making life more positive?
Definitely. The chapter also talks about the power of affirmations. Those are positive statements we repeat to ourselves to reprogram our subconscious minds and align them with what we want.
So instead of thinking negative thoughts like, I'll never get a job or I'm not good enough, we could affirm things like, I deserve abundance or I attract success easily.
Exactly. The key is to say these affirmations with conviction, to really believe the words we're saying.
It's about shifting our self-talk from doubt and fear to belief and feeling powerful. It reminds me of that quote, whether you think you can or think you can't, you're right.
That's a perfect example. Our beliefs have a huge impact on our reality, and affirmations are a way to consciously choose the beliefs we want to have.
So we've got visualization and affirmations. What other practical tips does the chapter offer to put this idea of transurfing into action?
The chapter also highlights the importance of being grateful. It encourages us to really cultivate a sense of gratitude for all the good things in our lives, even the little things.
So instead of dwelling on what's missing, we focus on what we already have. It's about appreciating the abundance that's already there.
Exactly. And the chapter makes a really interesting point. Gratitude isn't just about feeling good, it's also about changing our energy. When we focus on what we're grateful for, our vibration rises and we become more magnetic to positive experiences.
So it's not just about counting our blessings. It's about using gratitude as a way to bring more good things into our lives.
Exactly. And the chapter suggests practical ways to be more grateful, like keeping a gratitude journal, writing thank you notes, or just taking a few moments each day to think about the things we appreciate.
So it's about making gratitude a regular thing, something we do every day.
Right. And the more we practice gratitude, the more we train our minds to focus on the good stuff, which can have a huge impact on how we experience life.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation about how our thoughts, beliefs, and actions can shape our reality. It's really made me think about how I might be contributing to my own negativity without realizing it, and how I can use these techniques to create a more positive life for myself.
I'm glad to hear that. That's what's so great about this chapter. It doesn't just give us a theory, it gives us practical tools and techniques that we can all use in our own lives.
Absolutely. So to everyone listening out there, we want to hear from you. What really stood out to you from this deep dive? What's one area in your life where you might be unintentionally feeding a negative pendulum? And how can you use these techniques to shift your energy and create a more positive outcome?
Remember, even small changes in your awareness and intention can have a huge impact, creating positive changes in your life, and even beyond. It's about taking charge of your reality and becoming the conscious creator of your own experience.
A huge thank you to you, our expert, for taking us through these incredible ideas. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. I can't wait to explore more fascinating topics with you in the future. Until then, stay curious and keep your intentions focused on the reality you want to create.